the issues of the day. China. What went wrong? Let me be a simple quotation here. The late economist and foreign policy analyst, my colleague here at the Hoover Institution, Harry Rowan. Harry Rowan, by the way, was a lovely, humane, highly intelligent man. I say that because I'm about to read a quotation from him that suggests he was just mistaken. He wasn't always mistaken. He wrote this in 1996. When will China become a democracy? The answer is around the year 2015. This prediction is based on China's steady and impressive economic growth, which in turn fits the pattern of the way in which freedom has grown in Asia and elsewhere in the world. Close quote. Economic growth was supposed to lead to democracy in China, and that wasn't madness. There was the example of South Korea. Mm-hmm. First they got rich, and then they became democratic. And of Taiwan, they got rich, and then they became democratic. And you could argue that the American foreign policy establishment has lost a quarter of a century expecting things to go right in China, and they haven't. How come?
Well, I think these things are always somewhat overdetermined, but maybe if I had to come up with a simple mistake that people made was it was way too deterministic a view of history. There's nothing automatic about the way history can happen, and it's not that you get to $8,000 per capita GDP and you automatically become a democracy. These things can go in a lot of different directions. There's a great deal of contingency, and if I had to pick on you a little bit, Peter, here, it would be that there's that speech that you helped ghostwrite or write, right. Tear down that wall, Mr. Gorbachev.
Yes.
And it was effective, and the Berlin Wall came down in '89, and communism fell in Eastern Europe and in the Soviet Union.
Stop there.
But we can't stop there.
We can't.
because there were other people who paid attention to this, and there were people in China and East Asia who paid attention to this, and they drew some very different lessons. And the lesson they drew was that we have to make sure that we keep the Leninist part of the state running very strongly. We can have, you can have perestroika, you can have restructuring, but you can't have glasnost. And we're going to decouple them, and we're going to learn the opposite lesson because, you open things up just a little bit too much, and things fall apart. And I think for 28 years, I'd say at least '89 to 2017, we basically in the West read the events of '89 as that was inevitably going to happen in the East, mm-hmm. and China read them. It's not going to happen because we're going to learn from history. We're going to make sure it doesn't happen here. And the exact same events were interpreted in different ways, and they were probably not going to happen because China wasn't going to let them. And we were oblivious to this because we were just so convinced of this determinacy of history.
Right.
The riff I always have on this is that 2017, 2018 is the year that Xi became president for life, and that's the year that Fukuyama's end of history definitively came to an end.
Come back to Trump in a moment, but first, sort of a summary question about China. Population of 1.3 billion, intense work ethic, the ability to deploy capital and infrastructure. Everybody says, including you have told me this, you go to China and the airports are dazzling and the trains run fast and they're clean and efficient. And of course, now they have a habit of rapid economic growth. And in the long contest to come between the United States and China, what have we got? Democracy, a free press, innovation that keeps us 6 months ahead? Are you optimistic?
Well, it's very hard to score. I would say the although my pessimist.
I'm hoping you cheer me up on this.
My neutrally pessimistic description is that if you scored it, I think both sides think they're going to lose. I think the United States thinks that it's sort of like this declining power, but China does not think it's going to win. You have a demographic collapse.
Right.
Anyone who makes money tries to get their capital out of the country. People are still, if at all possible, trying to get out of China. And so if you were to try to, psychologically score the two sides and say, who believes they're going to win? Actually, they both think they're going to lose. And even if you think you're going to win, doesn't mean you're going to win. Although I think if you think you're
better
going to
way to
lose,
go through life,
if
though.
you think you're going to lose, you will lose. You know,
Right.
if you think you're going to get an A on a test, you don't always get an A. If you think you're going to get an F, you always get an F.
Right.
And so what's very confusing is I think both sides think they're going to lose.
I told a lie. One more question about China. You said a moment ago that in the 50s and 60s, a lot of the technological progress was driven in effect by the Cold War, by the military need to develop technology. Which reminds me of, again, I can't quote this, I can only paraphrase it, but there's some place in fairly early George Kennan, one of the diplomats and important writers on the Cold War, fairly early George Kennan, in which he wrote that he welcomed the long struggle to come between the United States and the Soviet Union because it would bring out the best in the United States. We had nothing to fear from this as long as we lived up to our own best traditions. He expected it to be a bracing struggle. Struggle between China and the United States help us technologically? Will it be good for our character?
Well, the Cold War, we won the Cold War, but there are a lot of different ways that could have gone. So I'm not quite sure.
You'd rather
I'm
not.
I'm not totally convinced of that. But I think, yeah, I think that I think the future version of I do think that the future that China represents is not a future that is particularly desirable. I was struck by this when I was in Western Europe a few months ago. That I think the future is something that always has to be thought of in relatively concrete terms, and it has to be different from the present. And only something that's different from the present and very concrete can have any sort of charismatic force. And looking at Western Europe, I would say there are basically three plausible futures on offer. Number one is Islamic Sharia law, and if you're a woman, you get to wear a burqa. Number two is totalitarian AI a la China, where the computers track you in everything you do all the time, and that's kind of creepy. Sort of the Eye of Sauron, to use the Lord of the Rings reference, is watching you at all times. And then the third one is hyper-environmentalism, where you drive an e-scooter and you recycle. And even though I'm not a radical environmentalist, I think if those are the three choices, you can understand why the Green Movement's winning, because those are the three visions of the future we have.
Right.
And the challenge on the conservative or libertarian side is to offer something that's a picture of the future that's different from these two very dystopian and one somewhat stagnant one.